one of the things that I see, with AI, we're going to be able to do a fantastic job at optimizing for numbers. And the problem is, it doesn't mean that it's going to lead to better business results. Even when you're doing puzzle setting and puzzle solving, storytelling is a huge component of it because it's not the data, it's what are you learning from the data.
I am so glad that you joined us on the Leadership Puzzle today, where we explore the pieces that make great leaders and great organizations. Today, I am joined by Radhika Dutt. She is an entrepreneur, product leader, an author of The Radical Product Thinking, a book which has been translated into multiple languages and is helping organizations around the world rethink how they innovate. Radhika built products across industries as diverse as robotics, telecom, and even wine. She brings a unique perspective on why value and vision-driven leadership matters more than chasing short-term metrics. In our conversation, we'll explore the importance of stories, how data and storytelling together help uncover insights that we might otherwise miss, and how connecting those stories back to vision can spark creative solutions that truly can change the game. Radhika, welcome to the Leadership Puzzle.
Yeah. First of all, I'm excited to be here and to chat with you. We have so many similarities in our backgrounds, and I can't wait to get into that too. But let's start with the puzzle piece. I love that the title of your or name of your podcast is The Leadership Puzzle. When you talk about puzzle and this idea of slotting things in because you're learning things along the way, this is so true for people in the company, employees too, right? And one of the things that I notice with goals and OKRs or objectives and key results or setting targets, no matter what you call it, KPIs, targets, etc., we need to leave space for people to learn and change things along the way. When we set goals and targets at the beginning of the year, we create this impression that we know the answer to what needs to happen. This is what we need to do. If we do this, this is a marker for success. And the reality is, during the course of the year, you learn a lot. You figure things out. Markets shift. I mean, let's just look at how quickly AI has shifted things, right?
Yeah.
There's so much shift that is constantly happening. And yet, we continue to set goals and targets and create this rigidity that doesn't leave space for slotting in these puzzle pieces. And by the way, to this, a lot of people say, well, that just means you need to do goal setting more often, just set goals every quarter, which we know that if you're in a large organization, it's hard enough to coordinate all of these goals and OKRs across functions once a year. Leaders have said to me, we would die if we had to do it multiple times a year. And so where I come at this in terms of this idea of puzzles is that goals and OKRs don't really work very well. They backfire because what we really need is a mindset of puzzle setting and puzzle solving so that we're constantly learning as an organization, experimenting, reflecting on what worked, what didn't, learning from those and adapting. So the experimentation, learning, adaptation is really what fuels success, not just goal setting and you hit or miss those goals.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I can see where in a product development or finance or HR, any function that's not necessarily numbers driven, that could make a whole lot of sense. What are the puzzles that we're trying to solve this year? What are those challenges we're trying to solve this year? And let's go do that, and we'll learn along the way, and we'll adapt. How What would you say to someone who is in the commercial side, sales, right? You got sales is one of the few functions that you set a goal. Here's my target for sales. How would you say reconcile puzzle solving with true sales targets, which can be measured on a daily basis if you have the data?
I love this question because that is our assumption, right? That sales requires numbers. It's what we've always learned.
Yeah.
But let's look at even that sales example. So I worked at a company, Avid, and we were dominating the movie industry for video editing. Like every Oscar-nominated movie had been edited using Avid's video editors. And, we had targets, right? And we were always hitting our targets, even exceeding them. But if you just peeled the onion a little bit and looked at what was actually happening, what you would see is our low end was getting eroded, the mid tier too, and the way we were making those numbers was by going further and further into the high end,
Yeah.
and it worked until it didn't. Right. And this is what you see in sales too. Like we've all seen salespeople scramble at the end of the quarter and go like, okay, what revenue can we pull in from the next quarter?
Hmm.
And you make numbers this way until you don't.
Yeah.
Even in sales, you need the puzzle solving mindset. Like one of the other things, I was talking to someone in sales and about this puzzle setting, puzzle solving mindset. And she said, one of the reasons I hated working in sales, even though I was good at it, was the level of competition and the lack of collaboration just between salespeople because it's about my making my numbers, my bonus, right? Like I have no incentive to collaborate with you. This is the sort of thinking that we create. And what you
Yeah.
really want in an organization is collaboration. So let's talk about what a puzzle would look like in sales.
Okay.
So sales puzzle would be, okay, the market is expecting us to hit X million by the end of the year. Sales grew over the last 3 years, but they've stalled. What might be happening? And here are genuine questions that I might not know the answer to, right? So questions like maybe there's something fundamentally shifted in the market. Maybe our competition has leapfrogged us and we just haven't caught up. So there's something we need to be doing differently. Maybe it is that we learned how to sell to the early adopter. We just don't know how to sell into the mass market. There may be a bunch of such things going on, right? And this is where we invite teams to help us. First of all, lay out this puzzle, and then you solve this. So the approach that I talk about is objectives, hypotheses, and learnings
Okay.
instead of OKRs, which is objectives and key results. So this is objectives, hypotheses, and learnings, where this was the puzzle setting part. So I used an objective, and the objective was how do we grow sales solving this puzzle to X million a year? But this is the puzzle and the challenge I see, right? So that's the
Okay.
summarized objective.
Yep.
And then I would use the puzzle solving approach where, we go in and we figure out what are the first set of solutions I might try for this puzzle, right? And I might try different marketing messages, or I might try I might try to talk to customers and then figure out, like, okay, what is it that is driving them to buy differently? And that might drive some next things that I'm going to do. So the way I would do the puzzle solving is asking 3 questions, right? So the first question is, how well did it work? So whatever we tried, it's not a binary question of did you or didn't you hit your goal. It's how
Right.
well did it work? And then the second question um, is where I say, well, looking at all of the metrics, what did we learn? So don't just spit out all the numbers at me, but rather like, what have you figured out from those numbers? What's the story? And then the third question is based on how well it worked and what you learned, what will you do next? Like, what is the one thing you can ask for if I gave you a
Right.
magic wand? Right. And this is the continuous learning, the sharing learnings and adapting. That's the scaffolding and framework for it.
It's really interesting because as you're talking about it, it resonates from an accountability mindset perspective, right? Where failure isn't bad. It's that process of learning and saying, okay, what else can I do differently to help, achieve whatever my objectives are, call them results or objectives, whatever that might be. And so you've actually just put a process in place that helps people be accountable to whatever they've committed to or whatever they're
Yes.
trying to go after.
So much to unpack in what you said, right? One is the accountability part, and the second is the failure and dealing with it, right? So the first thing about accountability is, you know, we think that setting goals and then asking this binary question, did you or didn't you hit that goal, is what creates accountability. The reality is, when you frame it in that way, the incentive you're creating for people is to show you what you want to see. Because you tell me you want to see these numbers, I will show you those numbers, right?
Yeah,
However, I'm going to achieve them.
right,
And even if it's not a malicious desire, just even subconsciously, it makes me look at what is working. It makes me focus on what is working. What you really want as a leader is you want people to also look at the bad numbers and figure out what's not working. So going back to the sales example, how often have we seen that you lose a deal and there isn't much introspection or reflection? People go like, okay, let's move on. They move on to the next sale, right?
yeah,
Whereas what you really want is that introspection, that reflection and adaptation. Like, what are we going to do next? Or what are we seeing? Why did that not work? Why
right,
did we lose that deal? So
right.
that's one thing. That's the part about accountability. The second part of what you said, that failure is okay. In an organization, yes, we all know that technically, we've heard this fail fast, learn fast. We
Yeah,
hear all these things like Amy Edmondson wrote her next book, which was The Right Kind of Wrong. It talks about embracing failure. And it all sounds great, but the reality is, it is hard to embrace that sort of failure. And how do you fail small? Because you want to embrace failure, but in a scaffolded way. And
right,
so having the scaffolding of saying, how well did it work? What did we learn? What are we going to try next? It helps you um, make that learning part of the process. And in terms of managing failure, that last question of what will we try next? As a leader, you can give feedback to someone and say, what you just said you want to try next. If that works or doesn't, it's a huge risk. So, what can we do to maybe make that a smaller risk,
right.
right? And so, this is where you negotiate in terms of what failure is okay in this particular area and where can you take more risk. So, that's to address like two really important points you brought up about both
Yeah,
accountability and failure.
yeah, and uh, and maybe I didn't really think that a failure, being an entrepreneur, that seems like the daily thing. It's like, you try something, it doesn't work, and you go. In the corporate setting, we're on this thread of sales. Sales didn't come through, right? You think you have your pipeline, and you think you're going to hit your goal, and it is always fascinating to me how many leaders will go, well, the market didn't. They put the blame on someplace else versus looking internally and going, okay, well, what could I have done differently? What could I learn from why I didn't achieve the objectives for the month, the quarter, for the year, whatever that is. Um, and that's the accountability piece that jumped to mind is how do we your process kind of almost forces people to think, okay, this is what I need to be doing and thinking about and solving for, and being responsible for, not just saying, oh, well, it didn't work, it's the market, we'll get it next year.
And that's such an interesting point, right? If we look a little bit at why does that happen? It's kind of defensiveness, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
you see this sort of defensiveness even when you're approaching performance reviews. When you start to tell someone like, okay, you're great at this, but this area, this is something that I want you to do better at, and you want to give them real feedback that's tangible. You might say, this is something I observed in last week's meeting that this was one way you dealt with it. Would you consider dealing with it in this way? What happens? No matter how well you phrase this feedback, usually you hear defensiveness.
Yeah.
People will go like, oh, but last week, you really that was a special situation. This particular thing was happening. Like there's first this defensiveness.
Right.
Why is that? It's because, our focus has not been so much on talent development, it's on performance evaluations.
Yeah.
We constantly want to focus on, are you doing a good job or not? And, giving you those evaluations, those ratings of 1 to 5. And the more we set up or prime someone to think that they're being evaluated, the less open they are for feedback.
Yeah.
And which is why the more we work on this evaluation, we sort of prevent this introspection reflection, right? And so one thing that leaders might feel about this is, wait a minute, so you're asking me not to do evaluations so much. And to that I say, I know, yes, that sounds radical, but let's consider for a moment like this parallel analogy, right? So first of all, looking at why do we do this evaluation? Why is this number so important that, you're a 5, this other person is a 4? Like, why are those numbers so important? It's because if you're doing a layoff, you want to know, who are the bottom 5, 10%, and
Yeah.
that's who you're going to lay off, right? But when you draw the analogy that, okay, this is like saying I'm planning a trip and I am planning for the worst case scenario. I'm planning for a hospital stay on this trip, right? Like it ruins your trip when you're planning for that worst case scenario as the foundation of that trip, right? So coming back to employee evaluations, instead of having that focus on, I want to give you numbers all the time because I know if I have to lay you off, like, what's my justification? Instead, what if that evaluation is more, or rather than the focus on evaluation, our focus is on development?
Yeah.
So when you share the answers to how well is it working, what have we learned? What are we going to do next? I can see the depth of someone's thinking when they present these answers to me. And I can see, like, I really like how you're thinking about this puzzle, or, here's what I need you to think about as well, right? I can give feedback. And if you're not feeling evaluated, it's so much easier to take this sort of feedback that I'm sharing because we're both on the same side. This isn't about me evaluating someone, right?
Right.
And so that's the sort of different mindset that we can bring even to performance measurement and management.
Interesting. Very interesting. We could probably spend a whole hour just on performance reviews. There's, they love. There's a lot in the news or in the content about performance reviews and that whole process and you bring up some interesting points of, hey, let's not evaluate them the same old way, but let's think about how do we really look at people in a different mindset, and help get the most out of them, right? And I mean, there are times when someone is just not the right fit for a job, and having been in HR for 20 plus years, sometimes it's just easier having like that tangible numbers to point to versus, well, they just don't, they're just not meeting the objectives year in, year out. And so that's the hard part on what is a better way to really be able to say, is this person top talent? Because we know that top talent will produce 8 to 10 times more deliverables and results than an average employee. Or are they, someone that's better off someplace else, and that's okay. We bless them. We send them off with some goodwill to go find a new home. So that's the hard thing with the whole performance discussion.
Yeah, and this, doesn't mean that we're all in a playground and everyone is, having fun and, forget what business outcomes are. By no means is it, leaving people in the playground and come back when you're done. Instead, as a leader, I constantly want to push my team on solving puzzles better, faster, more thoughtfully. And I am evaluating in the sense I want to get a sense of how well you're solving the puzzle, how quickly, etc. If I'm not seeing the progress at the pace I want, I would give that feedback very directly.
Yeah.
But so to your point, when you consistently see that you're not seeing the depth of the puzzle solving that you want to see, when you're not seeing the depth of performance that you need for your company,
Or they're
it is
not
time
they're
to
not
part ways.
completing the puzzles. They're not even finishing the puzzles, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, it's time to part ways, right? But I think what you said at the very start was you said this is a way of harnessing the most from every employee. That I think is a really important point because what this enables me to see when I'm working with people is there are some people who had this innate talent for puzzle solving that I wasn't even aware of. Like once we start using this, they really take off and are able to solve bigger and bigger puzzles. And I'm able to give them increasingly just more leeway. Just go forth and make it
Interesting.
happen. And there are other people that I see, you used to present numbers, but now I see the depth that there wasn't depth. I wasn't seeing the analysis that I really needed to see. I question just below that first superficial layer, and I don't see the kind of depth of thinking. And now I know I need to give you more scaffolding. And, over time, if I'm still not seeing, like either I find which small puzzles I can put this person on, or it might just be that we need to part ways because I'm not seeing what I need to.
Hey everyone, as we take a pause from this episode of Leadership Puzzle, I wanted to take a quick moment to share a bit about how we here at Evolve HR Solutions help your organization grow. We do a whole lot more than executive search. We also partner in HR consulting and leadership development. We work closely with your teams to design training, coaching, and development programs that turn good leaders into great ones. So whether it's helping your HR team navigate change or AI, or more importantly, build a leadership development pathway that fits your unique culture, we're here to help you grow from within. Because we know that only 30% of leaders have had any formal training whatsoever. So maybe it's time to let Evolve HR Solutions help solve that challenge for you. So if you'd like some more information, visit us at evolvehrs.com. That's evolvehrs.com. We look forward to talking with you soon. And now back to the program. I mean, I love this analogy. I've got it going through my head. It's like, I have a grandson and he's starting out with a 10-piece puzzle, right? And then you give people a little bit more. Okay, here's a 50-piece, here's a 200-piece, here's a 1,000-piece puzzle, and now I'm going to give you one that's double-sided, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so you can actually mentally see, I can see how this kind of mindset and thought process would help you determine when the person's ready for that next harder puzzle.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, so you've mentioned a couple times the importance of storytelling. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. With AI and with a lot of the systems we have now, data analytics, we've already talked that leaders rely heavily on data, but they don't know how to translate data into stories. So how do you think that you can help leaders do a better job taking the data, taking that analytics, and turn it into the story so that it's actually valuable to the people who need it?
Oh, I love this question. And there's so much behind that. One of the things that I see is, with AI, we're going to be able to do a fantastic job at optimizing for numbers. AI
Yeah,
is really good at optimizing for numbers, right?
right.
And the problem is that it doesn't mean that it's going to lead to better business results. So here's an example that I want to share. Let's look at dating apps. So the story with dating apps is in 2013 when Tinder came out. The swipe left and swipe right feature was a huge hit. It just skyrocketed user engagement numbers.
Yeah.
And so all the other dating apps looked at that and went, whoa, we need to copy this swipe left and swipe right. So everyone started using the swipe left, swipe right. Everyone was seeing fantastic user engagement numbers that people were spending hours doing this swiping left and right. Okay, well, what happened in the longer term? Because that showed great numbers in the short term. In the longer term, this sort of gamification of human interactions just created a toxic dating environment where just interaction, like people never stopped thinking of each other as humans in this dating field. It created a toxic environment where people in the dating field were just feeling burnt out, and and just this whole dating app burnout led to a slump in the whole industry,
Mm.
to the point where Bumble just recently laid off a third of all of its staff.
Wow.
Right. And so this was an example where they were optimizing for user engagement numbers. The optimization even worked in the short term, but what they were not thinking of was the full narrative and the story of how are we making dating a better experience for people? How do
Connection.
we monetize while also making dating a better experience,
Right.
right? This is the piece that when we miss out, when we miss the complete story for what is the change we're bringing about, that's when you see just the pursuit of numbers, but it doesn't lead to long-term results.
Yeah.
So one of the things I talk about in my radical product thinking book, so that was the first book, um, is a radical approach to writing a vision. And the vision statement is more like storytelling. It's a fill in the blank statement so that you don't fall in love with your own words. What you really focus on is telling the story of what is the problem? Who has this problem? Why must it be solved? What does the world look like when we can say we're done? And then finally, here's, how my product brings it about. So let me give you an example of this vision in storytelling format. This is the
Okay.
fill in the blank
All
statement.
right.
So today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like and learn about wine along the way, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine in this way. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world through a recommendations algorithm that matches wines to your taste and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. Now, the thing is, I hadn't told you anything about the startup that I'd founded in 2011, sold in 2014. But yet, when I told you this vision, hopefully you knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And that is the power of a radical vision statement. So this is the power of storytelling. And the idea behind radical product thinking was, how do you translate such a vision into everyday work? But similarly, even when you're doing puzzle setting and puzzle solving, storytelling is a huge component of it because it's not the data, it's what are you learning from the data? I think that's really the key, the reflection, looking at the data and saying, what story can you weave from this data? I think that's what triggers that creative way of thinking. That's what we need to do.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I used one of those. Was it Vivino that you made the app?
What was, oh,
The wine app?
no, it was called Likely.
Likely. Oh, okay. I used one called Vivino. I was like, oh, I wonder if no, that I love it where you're telling the story because and I in my research, I heard you mention this is like I could actually turn that into my own vision statement of, if I worked at Likely, I could very easily turn that into, the why and the mission and the vision of the company.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And when you have such a detailed vision statement, the one of the things that we can let go of is this idea that vision statements have to be short and memorable like a slogan, right? Instead, a vision statement is all about getting people to internalize what is the problem they're trying to solve. Why must it be solved? And in that case, if I go back to what you said about vision, mission, values, you know, there are like so many different things that one is expected to remember,
yeah,
or you file it away for posterity. This instead becomes something where if there are values that need to be embodied in what you're doing, it should be part of your vision statement, but
yeah,
genuinely belong in it, right?
right.
It should be, yeah, like everything that you want your team to really internalize, that is part of this vision statement where you don't want people to repeat it, your words, that they're saying it in their own words, and that's the power of such a vision.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny because I've worked for some big Fortune 500, and I now, running my own company. I'm working with a lot of different companies, and like all their values are like 90% the same, just different words, but same thing, right? Oh, people, we value our people. Okay, well, but weaving it into that vision statement actually can be so much more powerful than going, okay, well, here's our seven, core values that you have to remember. I
Yeah,
love it.
exactly.
I love it. Okay, so you mentioned stories, metrics that matters, chasing matters with chasing metrics with Tinder and the other apps, and I hate that swipe right and left. I use it for LinkedIn Recruiter app. When I'm trying to source. Been happily married for 34 years, so no need for the dating apps, but that it's like, oh, just let me just say I don't want to see them anymore. They keep coming back anyhow.
Yeah.
But you have a this great analogy of DC versus Marvel movies, and I'm a big comic book fan, and so I loved your analogy of how you thought about the movie business of what DC did for superheroes versus what Marvel did, and how they diverged and how their strategies were different.
Yeah, let's talk about the DC versus Marvel example. And we'll start with DC, right? So if I look at DC and their history, they have been just sales driven and just chasing numbers. What they were chasing was a yearly blockbuster. And how did that reflect in their movies? So in 1989, they came up with Batman. And, that worked really well. And so they came up with the Batman Begins, and then that went well. Wait, what was it? So then it was
Batman
Batman.
Returns.
Oh, Batman Returns. That's right. Then Batman and Robin Hood.
Yeah.
There was Batman Forever. Oh my God, that was a really terrible movie.
Yeah.
um, it just kept going, right? And then what did they do? They had exhausted this Batman Forever theme, and then they came up with the Christian Bale reboot. But at least that was really well done, right? So you
Right.
had The Dark Knight, which was also really well done. So you had more of that Christian Bale. And then when they were done with that, what did they do? They came up with the Batman in 2022. Right? It was just more of the same over and over and over. So let's look at what Marvel did instead. So instead of just chasing numbers, uh, Marvel had to do something different because they were on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And fortunately for them, along came Kevin Feige, who really had a vision within Marvel. And he rose up through the ranks. And his vision was he was a comic book fan like you, and he had really studied comic books. And he had this vision that we can create a Marvel universe that is true to the comic books, which are really a profound reflection on society and on
Yeah.
humanity. Like a lot of people don't realize that about comic books.
Yeah.
Um, and they challenged people's thinking, etc. And so he started creating the Marvel universe, right? And that was a really tough challenge for Marvel because they had sold off all of their characters. They'd sold off X-Men, they'd sold off Spider-Man,
Spider-Man, yep.
everything was gone. So
Fantastic
they
Four, yep.
Exactly. So they had to start with B and C list characters. Nobody knew of Iron Man before. It was a B list character where, only if you were a diehard comic fan, you knew about it, right? And so they built up the story around Iron Man, and they continued to build out these stories. And before that, even, by the way, they made one small test to see if this approach would even be successful. They put out Blade. That was a movie that was a cult following. It gained a cult following, and it was this vampire superhero character. They invested like 45 or 50 million, and it got box office returns of 140 million or something like that. So it went really well. So what they figured out from that test was it's about the power of our storytelling that we can really build this business as opposed to on the strength of the superhero characters
And they
themselves.
actually ruined the Blade because they kept trying to just do what DC did with Batman kind of one, two, three, right? And before they got to Iron Man.
Oh, that's such an interesting story. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so Marvel created this Marvel universe, and they put, after Iron Man, they created this whole set of movies and built out this universe, and it was hugely popular. They created three out of, no, actually, sorry, out of 10 um, box office toppers. I think they had like a good majority of it. Do you
Yeah.
know the exact numbers behind it?
I want to say it's 6 or 7 of the top
Yeah,
10 at one point highest grossing movies. I mean, because you hit Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and then that all
Endgame.
cultivated to Avengers, the first Avengers, which was super well received, and then they were planning even beyond that to the second one, and then Endgame, which was two-parter, and those exploded. Exceptional storytelling.
Exactly. But you know what is fascinating? Like they did so well with all of this Marvel Cinematic Universe and the number of box office successes, but they too fell into the trap again of just milking it over and over and just chasing numbers. And so if you look at their recent set of
Oh,
movies, oh, it's been dire. You look at The Marvels, it was a box office flop, really. I mean, they spent more than 200 million in making the movie, and it was something like box office returns of 45 or 50
yeah.
in the opening weekend. It was really bad. But there goes, I guess, another lesson, right? Like the moment you go back to chasing numbers and not really innovating, when you're not solving puzzles, that's where you see a decline.
Well, just this is just such an interesting study because you're right. After Endgame, they didn't know what to do. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think they had this clear vision, and all of a sudden you had this like, oh my goodness, and they even tried and threw in the Guardians of the Galaxy, which was even a they're a C team, if you will, but because they did such a great job getting the right actors in there that and the writing and the directing it became a hit. So like, oh well, we can try other things like the Eternals and just all these other properties that just don't work, and you don't really see how it fits into that broader vision of what they're trying to do, and it's now just complicated. And
Oh my gosh, it's so true. They even tried to create this TV series of Loki. Oh my gosh, the storytelling and the plot, it's more twisted and complicated than a rat's nest, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, it's one of those cases where you innovate, but you start chasing numbers, and instead you should sort of say, let's put a do not resuscitate order on this. And we switch and move on to the next thing. You're exactly right. They had a vision as far as, end game. It all was great. They should have put a do not resuscitate order and then created the next sort of universe. They now know that they can invent characters on the power of storytelling. That's the path they should have gone down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they deluded themselves going, "Oh, now let's go to the multiverse because that's what you have to do." And it's like, okay, well, that's the only reason you do that is if you want to bring, Iron Man back to life or something. And oh, by the way, the new Avengers, that's what they're doing, but he's going to be Doctor Doom instead of Iron
Oh
Man.
gosh.
Uh, okay, so speaking of storytelling, we connected because we've lived all over the world. You've lived in Singapore and South Africa and whatnot, and so you've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and one of the things I noticed is that a really great story can cross cultures, but it's hard to get those core components. What do you think, and what do you notice as a difference in how stories might resonate across cultures and how leaders need to adapt certain storytelling techniques to resonate, whether it's Singapore or Sri Lanka or Silicon Valley?
Hmm. Um, so here are my learnings from storytelling, from radical product thinking, and what really resonated for people around the world. And with radical product thinking, this was a really interesting fact that I learned long after publishing it. So the book came out in 2021. And what's interesting to me is most books that are published in the US, the majority of your readers are in the US, right? The outside of the US, it's a much smaller market for books. For radical product thinking, on the other hand, I have a huge following for the book outside the US. Like it's 50-50 outside the US
Interesting.
and here in the US. So, one thing that I noticed about my storytelling and what people shared in terms of what resonated for them is that it wasn't just focused on Silicon Valley examples. I was very deliberate about that. I do use the example of Tesla, despite my thoughts on Elon Musk and kind of his path since. But there are aspects of Tesla's innovation that are really important to consider. And so I did use that example. But a lot of my stories came from around the world. One example was from Lidjat, which is an organization very few people have heard of, but you've almost certainly eaten their products. If you've gone to an Indian restaurant and you've tasted papadums, which are lentil crackers that you typically eat with
Yep.
chutney,
Yep.
those are Lijut has 60% market share in that, and the rest is fragmented across a large number of players. They dominate the papadum market, and it was started by 7 women who were all equal founders, and today it's 45,000 women who are all equal partners in Lijut. It's an amazing story. But there are other such stories, and I guess one common thread that I see is that it's not just about the individualism and one person's hubris, like rah rah, this person created all this change. The stories were about, it's not just one person at the top who creates change. It's really an entire organization that bought into the vision,
Yeah.
and how they created change together. So it was less of this individualism, but stories of just brilliant and transformative products that created real change in the world, or for a group of people. But stories from around the world that people could really resonate with.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we can all consider in terms of our storytelling, just picking examples that are more representative of people who we're talking to.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember living in Malaysia, and they said, "Well, hey Jeff, we just moved there. We're all going for a picnic on Saturday. You want to go for a picnic?" And in the U.S., a picnic usually means lunch. It might be a late afternoon dinner, depending on when it is. And so my wife asked me, so what do we bring? I'm like, I don't know, sandwiches. I mean, it's lunch. She's like, well, why don't you find out for sure when they're meeting? Well, they're meeting at 7 a.m. because in Malaysia, it's too hot at noon. So their picnic was, uh, breakfast. So we had to change the menu. But that's understanding the story of, even something as simple that you think is pretty ubiquitous across the English language doesn't always mean the same thing. And so that's why I love that example. It's like the stories that engage a lot of people and talk about the products and whatnot can resonate with folks versus some colloquialism that oh, let's hit a home run. Okay, ooh, great. Have no idea what that means. But
Oh, I love that. And when I was writing the book, I was noticing for myself even how many such phrases I've adopted. And I had to be careful in not using such phrases because
yeah,
I was writing for people around the world.
right, right. No, that's great. Well, Radhika, unfortunately, we've run out of time. But how can people get in touch with you should they want to learn more about your process and your products and your services?
Yeah, so they can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love hearing from people and how they're creating change. So also, here's a free resource. You can go to radicalproduct.com and you can get the OHL's toolkit. From the toolkits section, you'll see if you click on toolkits, you can find the OHL's toolkit. You can download it and start to use it. It's in slides format so that you can start to use this to share, just your puzzle solving and puzzle setting approach on whatever problem that you're working on. You can use that as a leader to share with your team. And I'd love to hear your stories on just your experiences with OHLs. So for our listeners, who want to use OHLs, if you want to share your story with me, it may even make it into the book as a case study because the next book is something I'm still working on. So feel free to share.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Send Radhika your stories, and who knows, maybe you'll be immortalized in her next book. Well, Radhika Dutt, thank you so much for joining us and reminding us that innovation isn't really about change. Yeah, isn't about chasing the next metric. It's about telling the right stories and asking the right questions and keeping that vision really at center of where we need to build things. So, and I love your puzzle analogy, and it's about connecting the data, the stories that help people think more deeply and unlock the insights that will help them move closer to that shared vision. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Oh, and by the way, I would also be terrible as an author if I didn't also mention for my publisher that you can get the Radical Product Thinking book. It's still in bookstores all around you.
Oh, great. Yes, get the radical product thinking at wherever books are sold. And, if you've enjoyed our conversation, be sure to share, like, and subscribe to the Leadership Puzzle. You don't want to miss the next episode. So until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep putting the pieces together. We'll see you soon.